A lone gunman walks into an Orlando nightclub. He's armed with a pistol and a Sig Sauer MCX 223 caliber rifle. He's familiar with the club. He's been there before. He comes in late after security has stopped checking. He walks into the mostly gay and lesbian crowd, the mostly Hispanic crowd, and opens fire.
Oh my God, people are getting shot.
The bodies begin to fall and the body count begins to rise. It's the worst terror attack since 9/11 and the deadliest shooting in U.S. history. 49 people are dead so far, scores more injured. An act of terrorism, an act of hate, and a country left in disbelief.
You're watching a KMIR News special event, Standing United, live from downtown Palm Springs.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us for this special edition of the KMIR News Standing United, a community forum. I'm Gino Lamont alongside KMIR News analyst Hank Plant. Well, it's been 6 days since 49 people were gunned down in a massacre in Orlando, Florida. 1 year today since 9 African Americans were gunned down inside their own church in South Carolina. And 3 years since 20 babies were slaughtered inside a classroom in Sandy Hook. Thousands of people have died in mass shootings. The 49 in Orlando at the Pulse nightclub, just the very latest.
Gino, we're here in Palm Springs on Arenas Road, which is kind of the pulse of the LGBT community here in Palm Springs. And this is where we find a lot of bars and restaurants and other businesses that cater to the gay community. And, you know, one of the things that we've been talking about is that what happened in Orlando could happen anywhere, even a beautiful place like this. I'm not saying that to sound alarms, but just to be realistic. So tonight we want to talk with our panelists about some action behind the words that we've been hearing all week.
That's right. So let me take a moment now to introduce the panel who've joined us tonight. Representative Raul Ruiz from the 36th District is here tonight. We thank you, sir, for joining us. Palm Springs Mayor Rob Moon, also here tonight. Thank you, sir. Mike Thompson, CEO of the LGBT Community Center of the Desert, joining us. And Imam Raimundo Noor of the Islamic Society of Palm Springs. We thank you, sir, for being with us tonight. I want to begin with an article that actually you wrote, Hank, for the op-ed in the Desert Sun that on Monday came out in the paper and was spread nationwide by USA Today. Your opening line, Hank, in that article said, every anti-gay politician, every bigoted preacher, every self-hating bully has blood on their hands. Make no mistake about it, the shooting in Orlando, which targeted the LGBT community, was the end result of decades of anti-gay hate speech and gay bashing. Hank, are we all complicit?
Well, I think the people who spread hate speech are complicit. I wrote that for a reason, because I think that words matter. And words like even gay bashing and any kind of statements that call for inequality for lesbian and gay people gives permission to unstable people who have ammunition to pull the trigger. And I feel that strongly about it. I got a lot of hate mail. I'm glad the people behind us applauded here tonight. I got a lot of hate mail after that column, believe me.
Which is stunning.
Well, there were a lot of people who said this wasn't an anti-gay crime. This guy was a terrorist. This was an act of terrorism. And Mike Thompson is shaking his head no. Maybe that's something we want to talk about tonight.
We will absolutely talk about that. Before we do, Congressman, you were here on Sunday at a vigil where passionate people had very important things to say. I want to play you a little clip of what the congressman had to say right here on Sunday.
Throughout the international community,
Raul, what will you write to the NRA when you get back?
I'm going to tell them to stop their bull, to give universal background checks, and to make sure that nobody lives in fear of gun violence in our nations and in our community.
Congressman, by virtually any measurement, the NRA is one of the most powerful lobbying companies in this country. $50 million given to senators alone. talk to me about any conversations you've had with the NRA, or what's our first step, and what were you talking about last Sunday night?
Well, first of all, I need to tell you what my wife told me when I got home that night. She reminded me that I have 3 graduate degrees from Harvard University, so she said I could have used different words.
I can see where maybe she suggests possibly different
exactly.
words. But you
here,
were very passionate.
Because I'm very passionate, first of all, to condemn this act of terror, this act of hate crime that took the lives of 49 innocent people. And this is important for us in Palm Springs to show our solidarity, to show our resilience, to show that we can mourn as a community with the community of Orlando, and to give thanks to law enforcement and the first responders who risked their lives and the healthcare providers to attend to the victims and their families. And this is a way for us to take a stand, standing united against hate crime, against terrorism, in order to promote equality throughout the nation. Now, thank you. You're right, the NRA has a grip on many politicians, many career politicians who rely on them and speak their talking points when it comes to gun violence prevention. I am not one of those politicians. I refuse to take money from the NRA. I am not afraid of the NRA. I will stand up to the NRA whenever it is needed, when it means that we need common sense legislation to help us prevent bad people from getting bad weapons. Most members of the NRA agree that we need universal background checks. It is common sense to say that we do not want terrorists acquiring a gun in the United States aimed at innocent people in our communities.
So what's going to happen Monday? There are going to be 4 bills introduced in the Senate for gun control, including one from a Republican, Susan Collins from Maine. I think she's the most moderate Republican in the Senate who's trying to find a compromise. Will anything happen on this issue?
Well, I'm hoping that we will continue to advocate on both chambers, the Senate and the House. The House has voted against allowing terrorists from not getting a gun over about 16 times already. We have adamantly encouraged, demanded a legislation, any legislation that would help us prevent gun violence on the House floor, and we have come up empty-handed. Now, it is appropriate and it is respectful to have a moment of silence, to mourn for the victims, to show as a country that all of us are hurting, that all of us can show respect. But when you leave it at just a moment of silence, that we become complacent with this violence, we accept the terror that these type of incidents happen, and that is wrong. And that is why I have recently co-sponsored resolutions that would require the House to take an action to have a hearing after every time we have a moment of silence on the House floor.
That's right. Now, Mayor Moon, on a local level, if this could happen in Orlando, it could certainly happen in Palm Springs. What precautions are you taking as a city leader to protect your community?
Well, one thing we've done here in Palm Springs, we just passed our budget 2 weeks ago, and we fully funded our police force, all of our first responders. We brought our police force back up to pre-recession levels. We also funded $1.5 million to hire 9 new emergency medical technicians to bring back our emergency medical team that we had before the recession. So we are putting millions of dollars into public safety because all of us on the City Council feel that our first responsibility to the citizens of Palm Springs is public safety. So we're put our money where our mouth is, and we're funding that.
I wanted to ask Mike Thompson. Mike, you were shaking your head. I was talking about the hate mail that I got after my column. You know, the Desert Sun got 1,000 emails after my column because it also ran on the USA Today site. A lot of them were very, very negative, and they don't want to say the word gay. They want to say this is a terrorist act. This wasn't anti-gay. What's your feeling?
Yeah, well, and sadly, I'm not surprised by that. And I think there's this interdependence between the things that a culture values and the laws or legislation that it passes. And sadly, LGBT, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender people, so there I said it, you know, aren't valued enough in our culture to get our politicians to pass national legislation providing the protections that are needed. And until we change our language, the laws aren't going to pass.
Right. Imam, I want to bring you in here now. We know logically that all Muslims are not terrorists. But with all the terrorist attacks that have been happening over the past several years, What do you tell your congregation? What do you tell people who are not Muslim that they don't need to be afraid? Tell me what you think.
You know, what's interesting, Gino, is that our congregation are actually people that are very sensible, and they know that they're not terrorists, right? You know, here in Palm Springs, for example, we've said it on Sunday, and we echo the same sentiment of many of our national leaders. We stand behind this community for a number of reasons. They stood behind us, right? They stood behind us when our mosque was firebombed. We stand behind them on this issue of hatred and bigotry, because that's what it is. Regardless of what language we use to frame it, whether it was a hate crime or whether it was an to us it really doesn't matter. Human rights were violated on that day, and that's what we stand for.
But you know, I know you've said some very compassionate, loving things about the gay community, and I applaud you for that. Why do I feel like you're so alone on this? I mean, just today, for example, in Turkey, the Gay Pride Parade, which was planned for this Sunday, was canceled. There were going to be 100,000 people there. It was canceled. Last year it was canceled with 1 hour's notice. Now, this is the most moderate Islamic country, and these are our friends. Do you ever feel like you're alone?
No, not really, because the people that I talk to, the people that I am in contact with, they have the very same sentiment. You know, the Council for American Islamic Relations have the very same sentiment. We are all for human rights. We are all for standing up against that bigotry and hatred, regardless of who it's perpetrated against. And that's who we are. It may seem like we're alone. It may seem like we're alone, but actually many people share our sentiment with us.
All right, thank you, Imam. Congressman, I know that personally, after Sandy Hook, when nothing happened, public opinion was in the 80%, some kind of background check, something to keep these dangerous weapons out of the hands of unstable people. But nothing happened. I kind of threw my arms up and I thought, well, if 20 babies slaughtered in their classroom doesn't move us, nothing will. Have we now finally come to a point where we know we have to do something?
Well, first of all, let me say that any terrorist attack on any American is a terrorist attack on all Americans. We know that any hate crime here in the Coachella Valley on any community is a hate crime on all of our communities. And that's why we must practice the great American tradition, the great American value of bringing those who are guilty to justice and protecting those that are innocent, whether they're LGBT, whether they're Muslims, whether they're immigrants, whether they're from the Jewish community. That is our motto as Americans. Now, I am very hopeful that there is enough outcry by members of our great nation to really pressure their members of Congress to take action. That the Senate will take the lead, showing bipartisan support, because we need it to be bipartisan and we need it to be introduced immediately. Now, we can introduce legislation to keep bad people from getting bad weapons without violating the Second Amendment. If you are a terrorist, then you should not own a gun. If you have been convicted of domestic violence where you almost killed your spouse, you should not have a gun. If you have been clinically diagnosed as being having psychiatric illness which poses you a threat to yourself or somebody else, you should not have a gun. And if you have been criminally convicted of violent crimes in the past, you should not have a gun. But if you are a law-abiding, responsible citizen, responsible person, and knows how to protect your gun within your home, then have your gun.
Mayor Moon, you have been in the Navy, you've been a Navy commander, you know your way around weapons. Do you think that things are changing on this issue or not?
No, I think they're getting worse. And you talked a while ago about the NRA. You know, we had here one guy with hate in his heart and a gun in his hand, and he ended 49 lives, and then and destroyed hundreds of other lives of people who were their families, loved ones. It's, you know, we can't let this happen again. You know, this time, you know, we're mad as hell. We're not going to take this anymore. This time, he messed with the LGBT community, and you know, we know how to fight back. We fought back against the Republican administration under Reagan who wouldn't say the word AIDS. We fought back against you know, people who did not want to have equality with gay marriage. We fought back against the military who did not want gay people in the military. So we're ready to fight back. You know, one thing we can do right now, California is usually in the forefront of these things. We start the social movements out here, and they move elsewhere. You know, the Lieutenant Governor right now has the Safety for All Act, which would ban these high-capacity magazines, not just limit their sales, it would ban them. It would put limitations on buying ammunition. It would also stop people who are not allowed to buy guns from having guns. Gavin Newsom's proposed amendment, which we'll be voting on, doesn't take those personal weapons away from anybody, but it stops people from having these military-grade weapons that go out and kill large numbers of people. These are not defensive weapons. These are offensive weapons. We have to take them out of people's hands, and we have to start right here in California. Now, the NRA is going to be spending like crazy to stop this, and we have to fight back against the NRA, and we can start it with the gay community here by mobilizing people and starting the fight against the NRA.
Mike?
Yeah, I think this is an important conversation to have about guns and gun safety and gun control. But I think there's a two-track conversation that needs to take place, because there's this, you know, before Congress is the Equality Act that would say that it is illegal to fire, keep somebody out of housing because of their lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. When we have state-sanctioned discrimination, that says someone in our culture is less than. And that allows these hateful attitudes that fuel the desire to pick up a gun. So while we need to have these conversations about the gun, we need to also have the conversations of what are we doing to allow for people to be motivated to pick up a gun.
So let me follow up on something that Mayor Moon was saying and that Gino was asking about, Mike, with you, and that is it sounds like the LGBT community is getting on board this issue in a big way. Yesterday, the Human Rights Campaign, the most powerful gay rights organization in the country, said we're taking on gun control. Yeah. Today, Equality California, which is the most powerful LGBT organization in the state, said we're taking on gun control. Yeah. Gay community is very organized. Yeah. They get things done. Yeah. Am I right?
Absolutely. You know, and just look, tracking my social media news feed, you know, there was conversations after Sunday about it's time to bring back an act up attitude, because we get stuff done and we're activated enough in taking our own pulse in response to Sunday. There's going to be action, and that's what we need to be talking about, is what are the specific call to actions that we need to do both to influence the culture and then address this issue of gun control.
And that's where we as a very powerful community can lead on this, because the NRA can give money to certain congressmen and senators and sway them. They can't give money to voters, but voters can't be swayed by the NRA. However, we as an LGBT community can raise a lot of money too, and we can go out there and take this to the people and pass this in California, and we can start an entire movement across the United States.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to introduce you real quickly Father Andrew Green of the Church of St. Paul, the Desert. Father, you know, you've heard a lot of talk about hate speech. And certainly there were several ministers, Christian ministers across the country in the wake of the Orlando massacre who said horrible things. Are you concerned that any part of your religion could get hijacked, much in the way that the imam's religion has been hijacked, into this area of hate speech?
We have centuries of our religion being hijacked by hate. Our faith, the Christian faith, has been complicit in hate. Not all Christians, but frankly, even Christians who have a good spirit are often unable to separate between things that are changing, and so they intend the good thing but end up being ignoring the kind of hate that really is coming out. And the things that I say as a pastor may not be intended hatefully, even in the best of circumstances, that because of my own ignorance or my not being aware of what's going on in a particular community, like the GLBT community, my speech might be incredibly painful. So I accept that the church has been complicit in the past, and we need to take strong actions to make sure that we do not continue that kind of behavior and support.
You know, people throw around the term Muslim terrorists. Yesterday, Frank Rich, political columnist, said, well, what about the far-right Christians who kill abortion doctors and who firebomb abortion clinics? Should we call them Christian terrorists?
I think they fit the bill. I think they fit the bill. You know, one of the things that I'm very concerned about is when you talk to Christians about how they will be accepting and of gay and lesbian people, I went to a conference once where the fellow who is the head of started GLSEN, gay lesbian students and educators, and he had a scale, and on that scale on one side was hate, and then he asked, well, you know, everybody wants to be tolerant, right? And he took it up, and tolerance only goes halfway there. He says, how many of you want to marry somebody who tolerates you? And the reality is that we need to go all the way to acceptance, nurturing, to care. We need to actually move from this seeking just to tolerate, but to seek to actually love and embrace those who are different from us, and especially those who have been the victims of our hatred and our ignorance.
Father, thank you for that. Imam, the same question for you. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar said this week that ISIS is to Islam what the KKK is to Christianity. Is that a fair statement?
It is an actual very, very fair statement, and I don't think that most Christians would like the KKK to represent them on any front, right? I don't think anyone that espoused that faith would like that type of representation of hatred and killing and anything like that. So I believe the statement is correct. You know, make no mistake, Islam is what it is, and Islam has the same principles as Christianity and Judaism, you know, and so our principles are what they are. We don't compromise them for anything or anyone. You know, what we are here, what this situation has brought out, it has brought us a very interesting situation here, and many have tried to either pit us against the LGBT community or try to create a huge wedge between the two of us. You know, but what we are trying to let people understand is that regardless of who this crime was perpetrated against, if this was done to anyone else, we would equally stand up against that wrong, you see. So they're not representative of us in no shape or form.
You know, I'm an emergency medicine physician. I've taken care of many patients who have been victims of gunshot wounds throughout my training and throughout my work. And I can tell you that a mother who cries for their child who has been killed from a drive-by shooting cries just the same if they're LGBT, if they're Christian, if they're Muslim, if they're Latino, if they're African American, if they're Anglo, you name it. So when we talk about standing united, when we talk about this atrocious crime that has occurred in Orlando, this is our opportunity to come together as Americans, to accept one another for who we are, and to reaffirm our American values against hate, and for love and for justice, and to protect those that are innocent, and to go after ISIS and defeat them once and for all.
And yet, Mayor Moon, we're kind of in a bubble here because we live in a very LGBT-friendly place, maybe 50% of Palm Springs, and who knows about the rest of the valley. We have a majority gay lesbian city council. I look across the country, and there have been over 200 pieces of anti-gay legislation introduced in 34 different states this year. What do you think is going on?
I wish I do. You know,
is it getting worse?
I think it is. And one thing, you know, taking a phrase from a musical, you have to be taught to hate from South Pacific. I mean, if children are brought up and their parents and their teachers and the religious leaders taught them not to hate people, we wouldn't have this hate. So it's got to begin there. It's got to begin with those people who nurtured these children from the very beginning. I know I grew up in the South, in Arkansas, in a very racially segregated time in the 1960s. When my mother was always pointing out to me what was going on around me in racism, and she told me, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. We have to have our parents, our teachers, and our religious leaders taking these young people and telling them, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. And you know, people have gone in and shot up schools and movie theaters and other places, but there's no getting around it. This was targeted at the LGBT community this time. It was dead on the LGBT community, and we're not going to take it. We're going to fight back.
Yeah, the shooter had cased other locations, including Disney World, and he picked a gay bar. So,
Mike, you wanted to add something?
You know, it's interesting. Hank was talking about the amount of legislation that's been introduced just in this last year. And that's been since the passage of marriage equality, since the Supreme Court decision. We've had this pendulum swinging back, I think, in response to a culture of hate. And so that's what we've really got to do some education. You know, they're wanting to fire gay people because they're, you know, putting up their wedding pictures from over the weekend and not letting transgender people go to the bathroom. We've got a lot of cultural shift to do.
Of course, the big gains in the gay community have been in the courts, not among the people. I mean, let's be honest. Right. It hasn't happened at the ballot box.
Well, and civil rights happened the same way.
You
The
bet.
courts
Right.
first,
Right.
and then
Yeah.
public
Right.
opinion. I want to bring in real quickly Councilman Jeff Kors. The city of Palm Springs this week did something tangible about this kind of violence. Tell me what you guys did.
Well, the first thing we did is we passed the first resolution in the country in support of the Equality Act. And that's really important because if you look at how we won marriage equality, it started at local governments, passing domestic partners, passing equal benefits, giving recognition to same-sex couples, and doing the public education that comes with those resolutions. That hasn't happened yet with the Equality Act, and we want to be the first, and we are the first city to do this, and now this is going to spread. I've already talked to people in other cities. We need to do this every city in this country to build the kind of support to push Congress to act.
Is that realistic, Hank, do you think?
I don't know.
Every city?
You know, Jeff knows this world better than I do. Jeff, you know, I wanted to ask you, I don't know if people know this because they know you as our local congressman, but you're one of the most respected, I'm sorry, councilman. Didn't mean to take your job. There are already plenty of people trying to do that. Jeff is one of the most respected gay rights leaders in America. You were the head of Equality California. You led the fight on marriage equality way back when, before it got to be popular. So given that background, what do you think of what we were talking about before as far as the LGBT community taking on gun control as an issue?
A couple things. I was on a call of national LGBT and gun control leaders yesterday to start actually figuring out how we can work together to make this happen. And I think it's a perfect marriage. Right? The LGBT community knows how to not just pass legislation or win in court, but how to change culture. And this is going to take us changing culture. And it's also going to take us changing Congress to have people who support gun control and have people who support equality. And unfortunately, unlike our congressmen, the majority of Congress is not with us. But we can do this if the LGBT community, the gun control advocates, and others who actually care about people's rights and their lives work together.
But here, can I play devil's advocate with you? I think what you did this week and what the council did is great with your two resolutions. But this patchwork approach, even Gavin Newsom's state-by-state approach, is this what's needed, Congressman?
Absolutely not.
You got to do it federally, right?
We need a federal bill that will ensure equality for all individuals, that will make sure that LGBT individuals aren't afraid of being discriminated against in any institution of our society. Now, I'm an original co-sponsor of the Equality Act, and I'm also in the Equality Caucus. I am a vociferous advocate for equality and LGBT rights throughout our nation, and I always oppose any form of patchwork-like system that is going to say that in California we respect you as human beings, but in Texas we might not.
Isn't it also true on gun control? I mean, can you, let's say we pass Gavin Newsom's gun control bill.
Well, I believe the federal government needs to take action. Now, the first thing that we need to do is we need to lift the ban on scientific research so that we can really study the issue and make proper therapeutic recommendation in a public health approach to prevent gun violence. The second thing that we need to do is universal background checks so that bad people don't use bad guns to kill other people.
I don't think people know this, Jeff. You're a lawyer, you know this. The Centers for Disease Control is banned by law from doing research on gun control.
Yeah, absolutely, and we need that to change, and that does have to change at the federal level. But I do want to respond. I agree we need federal national protections for LGBT people and federal national gun control legislation, but we can't wait for Congress, which unfortunately is not getting a lot done right now because of gridlock, to do things. We have to do things at the local and state level. The reality is California has some of the strongest gun laws in the nation, and we're the 9th in per capita deaths from gun violence. Same for equality. If we waited for the federal government, we would still be able to be fired from our jobs here in California for being gay. So we can't wait. We have to act locally at the state level and push Congress to do it federally to end it once and for all.
Yeah, and also, I mean, look. Look at gay marriage. Gavin Newsom, against the federal law, started marrying gay couples a long time ago when he was mayor of San Francisco.
10 years.
And that got the conversation started. Then it caught on fire and it moved from California all across the United States and finally to the Supreme Court. We have got to start the conversation both as California and as LGBT people.
Mike Thompson.
The biggest impact that happens when we have these conversations at the local and state level is this is grassroots, neighbor to neighbor, engaging people to change hearts and minds. And that was the beauty of the equality movement. And that's the beauty of really changing a culture so that we can pass federal legislation. So it's got to be a dual track. You know, it's got to be a dual track, local and federal activity and personal responsibility that comes with that. I've got to talk to the people that I have influence with to get them on board, seeing things and why this is important to us.
I want to ask the whole panel this. If you define a mass shooting as 4 or more people dead, we've had nearly 1,000 since Sandy Hook. Is enough enough? Are we there yet?
Could I add something to Gino's question? We've had 1,000 mass shootings in Sandy Hook. Only 2 of them were Muslim. I wonder if people realize that. Go ahead.
Is this it? I mean, is finally enough to do something about it, Congressman?
Well, there's been since day one, since the very first atrocious killing and massacres, there's been strong individuals throughout our nation who's been calling for an end. We cannot become complacent. I'm hoping and fighting that this will be the threshold so that we can finally act and get this done.
Right, but you're talking about going back as far as Columbine. The first time I think this was really on the public radar, nothing. I mean, nothing. If anything, the gun laws have become more relaxed.
We talked about hate speech, and you opened up about how the hateful rhetoric that we're hearing in the political discourse, that we're hearing around our communities can lead to actual violence against our neighbors, against people in the community. There is structural violence in our policies and laws that don't recognize certain individuals as dignified to have the respect and the equality as everybody else. And that is when we need to stand up now and say, 1, we need to stand up against terrorism, be resilient, defeat ISIS, and we need to stand together against hate crime in all we do in order to ensure the safety of our constituents, our community, and our nation.
Imam, let me ask you a question. The congressman just talked about defeating ISIS. That's fine, but can you defeat an idea?
That's the 100-pound gorilla in the room, right? To defeat an idea. You know, many of those individuals that are talked into becoming terrorists, you know, it's to us, you know, for those of us that know differently, that know better, it's always a lack of education. I do want to say one thing, that, you know, there's a verse in the Quran, you know, that unequivocally states, and the verse is addressing believers, says that we should stand up as witnesses to Allah, stand up for justice as witnesses to Allah against any type of injustice, whether it is against your own self, whether it is against your kin or even your parents, right? Whether they are rich or whether they are poor, regardless of who they are. As Muslims, we are commanded to stand up for justice wherever we think that needs to be. You know, people like ISIS, if, you know, who knows what we know what their agenda is, but, you know, for many of us, you know, it's a political movement. It has zero to do with religion, and it has everything to do with politics.
All right, thank you, Imam. I want to bring in Palm Springs Police Chief Reyes right now. When you see something like what happened early Sunday morning in Orlando, an attack on America, an attack on the gay community, as the police chief of Palm Springs, does that sit you back in your chair?
Absolutely, it does. And first thing I think of is when events like that occur, you start thinking, were there flags raised ahead of time? Once this is all vetted out and they look at this overall situation, in most mass shootings, there were flags that were readily available for people to report. So if you see something, you must say something.
You know, Chief, I wonder if you're outgunned. I mean, I looked at that video that I saw on KMIR of the raid yesterday in Desert Hot Springs, all those weapons that were confiscated, and there were 2 rocket launchers that were confiscated. You got a tough job.
We do, absolutely, and our officers realize every time they go in service in the street that any given time we can have a minor shooting or mass shooting. They are required, and they understand they got to run to that situation and deal with it.
How many people have the courage to run toward a crime or toward a fire? First responders do, right?
Absolutely.
I think that's very important that we understand and that we appreciate and that we revere as a community and thank the first responders, law enforcement, the paramedics, those that are in the field, because it is true. When you look at any kind of massacre or mass shooting that has occurred, they're the first to put their lives at risk. And so they deserve the credit, the gratitude, and the honor that we can bestow upon them.
You know, Mayor Moon was saying earlier that his sister just retired from the force because she said simply, it's getting too dangerous out there. Is it more dangerous now than it was 20 years ago?
You know, I think 20 years ago it was just as dangerous. It's just now more pronounced now with social media. Social media travels immediately on any incident worldwide. And I think it's being exposed much more now to the general public.
But Chief, the assault weapons, I know you don't want to get into politics, I respect you on that, but you've got to wonder every time you go out or your officers go out, am I going to be facing an assault weapon? That's a whole different deal.
Absolutely, and a good example, most recent example, is not only this event that occurred this past Sunday, but San Bernardino. We've changed our dynamics as far as how we respond. We have a lot of special events in Palm Springs that bring thousands of people into Palm Springs. We no longer have our armored vehicles sitting at the station when we have these special events. They are deployed and more than likely at one street over from the actual event so we can have an immediate response, because our officers know you're highly likely to face an assault weapon, so we need to prepare them as best as possible.
Do you think that gay clubs need to be a little more cautious these days? There's a very famous gay bar in West Hollywood that this crowd knows about called the Abbey, and they have talked about hiring armed guards. Does that sound like it's incendiary, or what do you think?
I think that everybody needs to be more aware. At the end of the day, we need to pick up our head from out of the sand, look around, be aware of what's going on around us, and report what feels uncomfortable to give us a chance to address things before they occur.
There is no more accepting city in the country than Palm Springs. Certainly everybody who lives here is accepting of the others, yet as the Xander case taught us, it's not unheard of for violence against gays even in Palm Springs. What is the police department doing to protect its citizens?
What the police department is doing is very unique in our city. The city council passed an ordinance to create the Office of Neighborhood Involvement many years ago, which created an office where we created specialized neighborhoods throughout our city. We have 40 organized neighborhoods right now, and there's 2 more coming on board. So 42 organized neighborhoods where we have officers assigned to every single one of them as a liaison, to have that constant communication on what's going on with their individual neighborhoods. And I think that is a big factor in the success of this city.
I want to say something and reiterate something very important and pivotal that Chief Reyes said, which has been a sentiment and something that I firmly believe in, is that we can take personal responsibility for our safety here in our communities. We do not have to wait for an act of Congress or for Congress to get its act together to start working together to make sure that our communities are safe. He mentioned identifying the signs of weird behavior and reporting them. There's other opportunities to learn the skills if there is a mass shooting to run, hide, or fight back, which the chief and other individuals here are training members to do that. Now, the other thing I need to make very clear here is that we're talking about mass shootings, but women are killed far more by men and the domestic partners, their husbands, with a gun in their homes. And that is something that we need to address, and we need to stand up as well. And that's why I co-sponsored a legislation that would prevent any abuser from being able to purchase a gun, because there is a high correlation of any domestic abuser with a gun in committing homicide with their spouse.
All right.
And Gino, I'd like to add while the chief is here, that what he says about the community policing has been a tremendous asset to us here in Palm Springs, and it's an example for other cities. And also, 2 or 3 months ago, the chief held a meeting right here in Chill Bar with some of his other police officers with the LGBT community to assure them that the police department in Palm Springs was supportive of them. And when we had our rally here on Sunday night, we didn't ask for all the police department to be here, but they were here. And they were here mostly as volunteers because they wanted to be here and show their solidarity with the LGBT community in Palm Springs. So we have an incredibly unique and wonderful relationship with our police department and our entire city and our LGBT community, which other communities need to copy and do the same as we do.
All right, I want to thank everybody for taking the time to join us tonight, sharing your thoughts. I think this has been enlightening, and I think it's going to be helpful for everyone. I do want to put your feet to the fire a little bit. We'd like to revisit this in 3 months. We'd like to invite all of you back down to this exact spot and do this again in 3 months and see where we've come. We'll see what we've gotten through Congress. We'll see what's happened in Palm Springs. I thank you all for joining us, and I thank you for watching this special edition of KMIR News, Standing United, a community forum. Hank, thank you, sir, as always.
Gino.
Have a good night. Thank you for being here.